Captain Al here, and I wanted to show you what I just got in, a Portlight replacement lens kit from Lewmar, and thought I'd show you how I put these in. I've done 4 of these already. The problem is that the instruction sheet that comes with it, shown here, is nothing much more than a series of pictures that is complete, but not all that self-explanatory. So I thought I'd go through this step by step. First of all, knowing what size port light you have, these are new standard. The standard port light, being the old standard, had a twist lock. These are a snap lock and various sizes opening. And these I got offline, so if you can't read this, you can do a Google search and find them, I think. But the important thing is to measure the distances on the outside of the ports in order to determine what you've got. One thing that you won't find is that the information on the lens itself is all that helpful. I found an SZ3, presumed I had a size 3. These are in fact size 1 port lights. Here's the problem with age. This is a 2001 boat, so 16 years on these lights. You get a lot of crazing. The outer portion of the lucite cracks under temperature exchanges in hot to cold. I'm told that if you have a bright sunlight and hot windows and then you splash cold water when you're rinsing down the boat, that's part of the reason for this crazing. So the way these work is like so, and flip open and hold them open. So I'm going to be replacing this entire thing. The kit comes with the hinges themselves and the latches down here. So this is what comes in the kit that I got from Defender Industries. It's an entire new set of the upper hinges and the lower latches. And I found that the hinges are in fact a different, they're not identical to the ones that were there from 2001. This pin that goes through and holds it is a heavier pin this time around. And, oh, let's see, there's also these 2 little shims that are pretty important when you're putting on the latches, and I'll explain that in a bit. The first step to doing anything with these port lights is to remove this outer fitting, and it's a 3mm hex fitting, and that's the only size. I had to make up something for my drill bit here that I just cut off an old Allen wrench, 3mm. So you have to take all of these out, and doing so with a power drill makes life a lot easier. So once they're all out, this frame comes off pretty readily. You'll see that the screws themselves get pretty dirty because they're exposed between the frame and the interior part of the window. So it's pretty easy to get these scuzzed up. So I always clean out all through here afterwards. Now this is the latch, a single Phillips head screw holding it in place. And as I say, those are replaced. The hinges are here, and the important thing here is that there's no way to tighten the nut or the bolt that holds the hinge in place. So if you start to get a looseness in these windows, this one's fairly tight. It's really tough. You have to go through this entire process of taking the hinges off in order to get to that nut. This little piece of black plastic there is held in place by the pin that runs through it. So it looks like it should snap out and allow you to get to that screw, but that's not the case. So at this point I'll disassemble the hinges and the latches from the frame. So latches first. I use a hammer drill to do this. making sure that it's in nice and tight so you get it over out, because you don't want to strip these. And once the nut itself is loose, you'll see that this hinge doesn't come out readily, but has to be sort of wiggled out a little at a time. Okay, screw out. And the latch piece itself rocks, it's hooked underneath the frame, so you have to wiggle that to get it to come out like that. Okay, so you can see that little latch hooks up underneath the frame and holds it in place. The other thing that's in there is this shim that goes between the screw and the frame. So that's an important thing to get out. So, okay, we got those two out. Let's turn our attention to what's the harder of this, the hinges. So the trick to getting these hinges out is to remove the hex head screw that is the pin that the hinges rest on. These old ones are a 3mm, and I've got a 3mm key here, and I can turn it slowly using this, but it becomes quite a frustration. So I've been able to find a little better improvement with a key, a millimeter hex key Allen set that allows me to turn that within the short distance between these 2 points. It's very important that the head of the screw be headed toward the outside of the window, to the right and to the left, so you can have reasonable access to the heads of these screws so that it can be taken out that way. This is just long enough I can get it to actually turn without having to reset it every time. So what's happening is that hex head nut is getting loose, or bolt is getting loose, and this end there's a crown nut that will appear out of this end that holds the bolt itself in place. So I'll continue working on this and show you what the final result. So I've loosened it to the point where the nut is now sticking out a bit, and can pull that out to release that, and then try pushing out the bolt itself. So pushing on the end, trying to get it to free up while wiggling the hinge itself so the tension comes off of it. Now with the bolt out of place, this little plastic piece no longer has the pin holding it in place, and that will come loose too. Since you're going to be replacing that with a new kit, it's not a big deal unless you're just taking this out to get to the so this now will come out. Like so. And see if I can orient it. Yeah, so there's the hole that the pin goes through. So that finally frees up this particular hinge. Now I'll do the same over here. To tighten this hinge, if this hinge comes loose from the frame, you need to get to that Phillips head screw right there, which is pretty tough to get to. You have to take everything off that I've just taken off in order to just tighten that up. So again, I'm using something that I'm pretty sure is going to remove this. So the only thing you're going to be keeping out of the original window is the interior frame. By the way, this goes in with the little weld part down, and then the screws that hold that in place. So I'm going to spend some time and clean up this and the screws. The other thing that I found the hard way, it's important, is to segregate all those parts that you aren't going to use. That came off, the old latch, the old offsets, everything, and put that into the plastic bag and keep it out of the way of the new stuff so you don't make a mistake and pick up some of the old parts and try to put them in. These are going to be a different fit. With the old parts safely tucked away into the bag, I did save out the original hex head pin that is in the hinge to allow you to compare that to the new one on the top. You can see it's a bigger, thicker pin, a little more strength, I presume. But what that means is that the thinner pin is no longer going to fit the new hinges or the new plastic inserts that the hinge pin goes through. So that's why you have to take off all the old stuff in order to get all the new hardware in place. They're quite different. Wanted to show what the process is before working in a tight spot. So this is the hinge, and the nut goes through, or the bolt goes through there and tightens into the frame. This little lip hooks over the top of the frame. Now, since you have to take everything off in order to just tighten this, what I decided to do is put a drop of Loctite on these screws. Latch the hinge over the top of the frame. Tighten down. With the Loctite on it, and give it a good twist. So both of those are now in place. There's no right or left on those. They're interchangeable. So the hex bolt has to go in from here out. So I'll work that onto the hinge. Both sides. And get it aligned enough so that the hex bolt starts into the hinge just a little bit. Okay, and now goes in a little bit, but I have to get the plastic piece in, so I'm going to raise the window up, slide the plastic piece in place, and then continue moving the hinge or the pin in. And it draws the crown up tight. Until you feel a little resistance. You end up tightening this just to control the resistance on the hinge, but we'll tune that up after we get the other side of the hinge in. So same thing, second verse. So left hinge is now in place and tightening down. By the way, it's hard to find hex drives that are millimeter. This is a 5/32, I think, so that works for a 4 millimeter. It'd be great if I had a 3 millimeter, but didn't. So that's tight, and that's pretty good for the window, maybe a little tighter, so you can adjust the tension just by squeezing these down and deciding what's going to hold the window up without allowing it to swing free. So the final thing to put in place is the lower latch, and this is where the shims become critical, that they have to go between the latch itself and the frame and held in place by the nut that holds it in place, the bolt that holds it in place with the Phillips head. So what this does is offset the latch just a little bit. We missed putting one of these in and found that the latch, once latched, stayed very tight and was hard to get off. So this is important, and they give you new ones to put in. I'm not going to use Loctite on these because these are always accessible, easy to tighten up if you need to, whereas the upper hinge pieces, you have to take the entire window off to get to them, so that's why I decided to use Loctite. It's about the only trick of putting these latches in is that you have to hook in underneath the frame itself and then tighten in, and make sure you don't lose the black shim at the same time. Give it a good twist, stay in place. Okay. So with the new lens in place, let's try the latches. Seem to push in, push up, and then make sure they release. Okay, we're in good shape. What's left is to put in the frame with the cleaned up frame and the cleaned up screws. So all of these have been put in finger tight to get them started, and then use the driver again. I have it set at 5 so it doesn't come down too hard on them. But tighten all of them up, at least the first time. Go all around. And then one final pass. Make sure they're all tight. And the final step is the most fun, taking off the protective sheets on either side of the lens itself to see how clean the whole process is. So, got one on both sides. And this one's sometimes a little tougher to get to. And I'll take out the, and there you have a clean as, oops, clean as a whistle new lens.